My name is Mike Bolte. I actually don't work for the 30-meter telescope project. I'm a professor at the University of California at Santa Cruz. I teach astronomy. I do research there. But I have been involved in the TMT from the very beginning. So I'm not going to talk as long as Peter. Oh, no, and I'm sorry. I enjoyed that very much, Peter. But I have not as many remarks to make. I was going to talk about two things, in fact. The first is just a little bit about telescopes, which perhaps we don't want to lose. So from whenever men and women were first on Earth until 400 years ago, until 1609, the way that we observed the heavens was with our unaided eye. We looked up at the sky, and if you go outside and there aren't too many city lights, you can see about 2,000 stars with your naked eye, with your unaided eye. And, you know, people did amazing things observing the heavens with their eyes. The incredible navigation feats that many people in this room know much more about than I do. Developing calendars, clocks, knowing when to plant crops, knowing when to do. That was all done by looking at the sky. And that's what we knew for probably hundreds of thousands of years. So what happened in 1609 was Galileo made the first little telescope, and it really was a little telescope. It had a lens at the front that was 3 inches in diameter, and the whole thing was that big. So what did he do? Galileo looked at many things, but he started with the planet Jupiter, and he saw that there were moons that were orbiting the planet Jupiter. Those had never been seen before. He looked at the planet Venus, which is the morning and the evening star, the very bright thing that follows close to the sun, and he realized it went through phases, just like our moon does. And those two things, the moon's going around Jupiter and the phases of Venus, were the scientific proof that, in fact, the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, which everybody had assumed till then. They assumed that the stars and the sun and everything went around, went around the Earth, because we don't feel like we're zooming around through space, right? We're all sitting here. And that model of the universe that pretty much all peoples, independent of culture, so, you know, folks all over the world developed their models for how the universe came to be and what the universe is like. And pretty much everybody assumed the Earth was at the center. So Galileo, with this tiny little telescope, all of a sudden changed humankind's view of their place and what the universe was like. All of a sudden, the Earth wasn't at the center anymore, but the sun was. So that was the start. The next thing Galileo did isn't as well known, and that is he looked at the Milky Way. I don't actually quite know where we are. The Milky Way is this beautiful milky stream on the sky that you can see from any dark site. People didn't have any idea what that was. Galileo, with his little telescope, looked at that and realized that the Milky Way was composed of thousands and thousands of stars. Okay, so all of a sudden, it wasn't just those stars we could see with our unaided eye. Our universe went from a few thousand stars to hundreds of thousands of stars. And that's pretty much how it's been going. So that little telescope was tiny. People have built larger and larger telescopes. With those, you get a better and better view of the universe. You can see fainter things. You can use magnification to see things better. And, you know, since Galileo, since 1609, we've learned a whole bunch of stuff about the universe. 100 years ago, as telescopes got powerful enough, we, for the first time, realized that this galaxy that we live in, this galaxy of stars that the sun and the Earth is a part of, was just one of billions of galaxies out there. And not only was the Earth not the center of the universe, the sun wasn't the center of the universe, not even our galaxy was the center of the universe. But we live in this unimaginably vast space. So this is what telescopes have been doing. And the 30-meter telescope is sort of the next in this long line that goes all the way back to Galileo of building instruments and telescopes that allow us to look further and further into space and therefore time, and to see things much more clearly in our own solar system, in the local universe. So the reason astronomers are excited about the 30-meter telescope is we think this is the first time we'll have a facility powerful enough to actually look, and this sounds crazy, to look all the way back through space and time to the very first stars and galaxies that formed in the universe. Okay, so that's why we build these things. Gerald said I should remember to make a point. And that is, some people say, well, that's all fine, you know, to try to develop physical models for the universe. But what else has astronomy done for me lately? And it turns out there are lots of side benefits from astronomy that I typically don't talk about much. The real reason that humans undertake this study of astronomy is really to explore the universe, try to figure out how it works. But there are many things that happen. As we've developed adaptive optics to make clearer vision to the stars with telescopes, you can apply the same thing to look into people's eyes, and this has become actually quite a big thing. So understanding degenerate eye diseases has become much, much better with those same adaptive optic systems that we use at telescopes, looking in people's eyes. You can do both the medicine better, you can do the research better. We develop computer programs, algorithms, to look for structure in the galaxies in the sky, try to figure out how clumpy it is, how to quantitatively define the universe. And it turns out those same algorithms have now been put to use, people looking for very early signs of breast cancer. So if you get a mammogram, they look at the distribution of unusual cells, and much, much earlier now you can detect precancerous activity using these algorithms from astronomy. In the end, atomic physics, quantum mechanics, understanding how atoms work, the microscopic world, that was all originated 100 years ago now by studies of the sun. Astronomers said, boy, there are a bunch of funny things we see in the spectrum of the sun, which led to quantum mechanics, which is the reason we have computers and digital projectors and phones and all this stuff. So astronomy is actually at the basis of many practical things that we all use every day in life. Okay, that was the first thing, telescopes. The second thing I wanted to talk about, and this is actually what I'm happy to talk about with the folks in this room in particular, and that is the TMT process and what was in my mind, and most of the people's mind who were leaders in the project as we went along. We first started to consider Maunakea close to a decade ago. I think this project started in about 2004. And we already knew that the world here in Hawaii was different than it had been when the telescopes first started to be developed back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. So we knew somehow things had to be different for the TMT to successfully get a permit to build at Maunakea and to be accepted as a positive thing in this community here on the Big Island. So we came over and we talked to people. We talked to people in the agencies in Honolulu. We talked to people at the Office of Maunakea Management. We talked to many people on the ground here in the community, both supporters and opponents. And to be honest, there weren't that many supporters. There were plenty of people who didn't quite know, but they had a vaguely negative sense about astronomy because that's what had been building in the community, in my opinion. So the first thing I want to say to everybody in this room, and I say it to anybody who I get the chance to, is every single person who I interacted with in those early days and ever since, their guiding principle, for sure, was doing right by Maunakea. Not everybody had the same vision for what that meant, but I never ran into anybody who suggested that we take any shortcuts in the permitting process. We certainly got no free passes whatsoever. Everybody was doing their job. They were interested in the mountain and interested in doing right by the mountain, doing things Pono. Again, there's not a single exception in all the many people who I interacted with all those years. So we said, what do we need to do? We realized that not everybody is happy. In fact, most people are not happy with, well, I don't want to say that. We realized there were ways the mountain could be managed better. And we wanted our project to be one that recognized all those things, that understood more what it meant to do things in a Pono way, and we wanted to be the leaders in sort of setting a new standard for how things were done at Maunakea and even broader within the state of Hawaii. So let me see. I only wrote things down so I don't forget anything important. So we heard a zillion things, right? The first thing we learned, I think, was that nobody trusted us. Most people viewed us with suspicion when we showed up. Office of Maunakea Management, many of the people in the community. So we had to demonstrate that we were really interested in doing things differently, that we were able to listen. It's not so easy to listen, as many people realize. So we were going to listen, and we were able to listen. We were going to do things differently, and we had to sort of prove ourselves to be trustworthy before anybody would trust us. So that's what we worked on in those early years with lots of folks. So we heard of many things. I'm going to tell you the three main things that we heard and what we did about it. The first was the site. The specific site at the mountain is very important. There are places that are highly sensitive, and there are places that are not as highly sensitive. Every place up there is sensitive, right? But some places are less sensitive than others. And we weren't the first ones to think about this or realize this. Going back more than a decade now, people had identified the areas up there in the summit area. Of course, the summit has never been built upon, that were less sensitive for cultural reasons. That has to do with view planes, for cultural reasons related to the archaeology of the site, right? For environmental reasons. So it's a very fragile environment up there. There are ferns, there are lichens that aren't found anyplace else. Just because of the way the climate is up there, it's a very difficult place for anything to live. So you got to be careful with all that stuff, the insects. So started in 2000, even before that, this place called the Northern Plateau had been identified as one of the least sensitive areas up there, certainly less sensitive than the summit ridges where the telescopes currently are. It's about 700 feet from the summit down there on the north side. It's a hard lava plain. There are no pu'us down there. And from this side of the mountain, from Hilo side, you can't even see you wouldn't be able to see the 30-meter telescope sighted there. And because it is down so far from the summit, from many of the view planes along the coast on the Kona side, it's also hard to see it there. It's less obvious than the other telescopes on the surface. So we learned that we should go someplace that was less sensitive. One had already been identified. The TMT didn't make this decision. Many people had been consulted about sensitivities up there. It was reaffirmed that this was the least sensitive place amongst those areas up there by the Kahuku Mauna. We had long discussions with them. And in the EIS, that was part of the EIS, was evaluating the impacts on both environment and culture. Okay, next thing we heard was that there are many people in the community here who were fine with the concept of astronomy as a sort of a good industry for this island, right? You have a unique resource up there. The skies above Mauna Kea are the best window to the universe any place on Earth, okay? It's a clean industry. The people who work at observatories aren't astronomers. I should just be clear about that. 30-meter telescope, our operations plan, we have 140 employees, and maybe there'll be 6 astronomers. The rest are all people who do engineering, various technical things up there. Computer science, you need financial people to do the books. So these are considered good jobs. And many people in the community here said, yes, those are the kind of jobs we'd love to have, so when our kids go off and get their college degree, they have a good livelihood here back home. And they don't have to stay on the mainland or wherever they end up. They can come home and have good jobs. The problem that we heard was it was hard. That promise had never been quite realized. And in fact, the path from today to good jobs in the astronomy industry, I don't really like that word, but there it is, it wasn't there. So we said, what can we do to help? And we heard a couple things. We heard STEM education was important. And you got to start with the kids, K, all the way up through 12, making sure you're engaging kids in the so-called STEM sciences. Engineering, technology, science. So this is the origin of the Think Fund, the $1 million a year that goes for STEM studies. We also heard that the TMT shouldn't be distributing that. We should put that in local hands, so we've done that. So K through 12, get the kids interested in science and in education. Make school fun. Second aspect of that is what we call our workforce pipeline development, which is the same thing, just higher up. So now you're a kid in the community college or at Hilo, or someplace else. It doesn't have to be somebody from the island, but we're targeting these for people on the island. And you have the opportunity to do internships at the observatories or some of the related high-tech businesses around here. So you really get a skill set that guarantees that you'll have employment by the time these things roll around. So that was what we heard. We heard we got to have programs in place, and it would be helpful if the TMT could fund these, basically be engaged in the community. So we did that. Yeah, the last, well, not the last thing, but the last thing that I'm going to talk about here is the other thing we heard is actually a common problem for states every place. States, have all these public lands. It's up to them to take care of them, right? To monitor things, to make sure the environment is well taken care of, and you have all the safeguards in place that things don't go off the rails all the time. And that takes resources. So the other thing we heard was the Office of Maunakea Management needs resources to properly manage the mountain, to hire the rangers up there, to have guides, to do monitoring, to sort of keep the observatory's feet to the fire in that case, but there are other activities up there too. All that takes resources. So instead of the $1 a year rent, which is just a nominal number that the other observatories pay, we agreed to $1 million a year, 80% which goes to manage the mountain, stewardship of Maunakea, 20% goes to OHA. So that's what we think of is we said, okay, let's hear what people's issues are, and let's address them. And let's address them in a serious way. And so that's how we develop these programs. We always did it in consultation with people here, because one thing Peter said is absolutely true, and I've learned it multiple times now, and that is it's really hard to understand somebody else's culture. And you can spend as many years as you want. I've spent many years in Hawaii, right? And there are a whole bunch of things I just don't get. And I've learned whatever my view is, if Richard Ha says, no, Mike, that's the wrong way to think about it, he's right, and I'm wrong. So anyway, thanks for listening to that. That's what we've been trying to do. We've been trying to not just be a continuation of some bad way of doing business. We've tried to define a new way to do business up there, that the community benefits better, the mountain is better taken care of, yet we still access this fantastic view of the universe and continue this exploration of the universe. Okay, I have two little stories to finish up here. And these two stories are related to why I still am part of this project, to tell you the truth. If I thought everybody was against it, I'd say, well, this is the wrong thing to do. So one of the stories was during this contested case hearing. It was the fall of 2012, I think. There were many people in the room here who were there. I was there for all 7 days. It was hot. The room was crowded. Everything was emotionally charged, right? These are deeply held issues that people are in there to express their views on. So, there was lots of muttering during most of the time, and you could just kind of hear this rumble of discontent going on. So I was called to give testimony about the scientific promise of the observatory. So I had my prepared remarks. I went through them. And then I was cross-examined by, I was hoping that he would be here tonight, by Uncle Koo, right? So he sat down. I wasn't actually sure what a cross-examination of the science was going to be. And he just immediately launched into asking me questions about astronomy. He started with string theory. He went to how galaxies form. And this room, which, just had an atmosphere of high tension, all of a sudden, he would ask me a question, and there wasn't a lot of muttering. There weren't people, shuffling. Everybody was silent, and they were listening. And we had this wonderful conversation for about 20 minutes about astronomy before the hearing officer finally said, well, this is all great, but we have to get on with this thing. And when I sat down, I thought, this just reaffirms to me that across cultures, across everything, everybody loves exploring the universe and learning about what we do. Second story is quicker. At another one of these public meetings, I've been to many. This was one of the scoping meetings for the EIS, I think. Everybody signs up, and at the end of the meeting, you have the microphone for 3 minutes, and you say your words. So one of the ones we had over on the other side of the island, guy had signed up, an elderly man. I don't know who he was. I still don't know who he is. He walked up to the microphone. He gave his family and his place history, which is often how that starts. I love to hear that. And then he said that his grandfather had, been a kupuna. I don't know if Maunakea was actually his kuleana or not. I can't remember. But anyway, he said he was a kupuna, and he thought, this old fellow, that if his grandfather were still alive today and he did this, he said he'd want to be one of the first ones to look through your telescope. That's all I had to say. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate you being here.
Don't go anywhere, Mike.
Oh, you got some questions here. Several people asked questions about what science can be done by TMT on Maunakea and not in Chile, and what can be done in Chile but not in Maunakea.
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. So we considered Chile as one of the sites. Maunakea turns out to be a little bit better than any other site we've ever tested for doing astronomy, but a little bit better is a little bit better. Thank you very much, Judy. I'm going to take a sip. But as actually may or may not be obvious to everybody, if you go out from Maunakea, we're at a declination on the Earth of plus 19, you can see a certain chunk of the sky. And in fact, you can see things that are north of about 40 degrees latitude that people in Chile will never see. So astronomy, I just told you there are billions of galaxies, right? So you can say, well, how come those 2 billion over there aren't just as good as the 2 billion in the south? And for certain kinds of science, you're absolutely right. There are some key objects that you can only see from one hemisphere or the other that have played pretty key roles. In the southern hemisphere, it's mostly something called the Large and Small Magellanic Cloud, these very close dwarf galaxy companions. In the northern hemisphere, it's this beautiful galaxy, one of the only ones you can see with your naked eye, called Andromeda, which looks a lot like the Milky Way, which is kind of our test bed for many, many theories about how galaxies like our own are put together. It's hard to study ours because we're in the middle of it. Andromeda is this beautiful example of a big spiral galaxy there. But basically, the big telescopes in the south and the 30-meter telescope at Mauna Kea are beautifully complementary in that you can cover the entire sky.
Okay. It's a question that goes back a ways. Perhaps the writer already knows the answer, but what year was it that you and Henry Yang sat in Rose Sang's office and first heard the Hawaiian concerns about TMT? And do you remember what they told you?
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. So I started working on this big telescope project in the year 2000. Okay, we first started visiting people like Rose Singh, who was the chancellor at UH Hilo. I don't know. Richard, do you remember? Because we engaged you pretty early, too. Must have been 2003, 2004. Yeah, what...
Dr. Yang, Inoue's aide with the promises was in the hallway. You remember the meeting. Kealoha Pashota, Paul Nevis, Kaliko Kanahele, and several other people. You remember that? I think that's the one Nelson's asking you about.
Okay. Why are you asking Nelson? I don't want to be evasive, but I'm not... Yeah.
It was quite a few years ago, probably 2007 or 2006. And I think the same tripwires that Peter told, the Gordon Moore Foundation, was told to you by the Hawaiians back.
Yeah, okay, that's correct. That's absolutely right. Oh, yeah, so just a minute. Peter's report, which has recently been in the news again, the Keystone Report is what that was called. You pretty much learned everything that we had been learning in all our conversations over here. There were a whole bunch of issues with the management of Maunakea, basically. There were a whole bunch of issues with astronomy not engaging the community here. The benefits went to University of Hawaii astronomers, a fraction of the telescope time. And people said, no, the benefits need to come back to this community where this mountain is housed. And so we heard those things for a long time, Nelson. And that's exactly what I was hoping. I was explaining that we tried to address those very tripwires because we knew that they were there.
Thank you, Mike. So the follow-up is, did you get the desired result from doing what you did since you heard the concern?
Well, so that's a great question, right? So here we are today. Did we anticipate that there would be a new, and I would say even stronger resistance? You know, I guess we didn't very well. Our goal had always been to talk to people until we found some common ground and we had a real kernel of support that was spreading here. We obviously didn't talk to enough people. There are still some issues.
Okay, Nelson, this isn't a back and forth. I appreciate you. I gave you your question, so thank you. Here's a question. Why is TMT going forward, though the lease will expire relatively soon after TMT is built?
Oh, yeah, I'm not going to hide anything here. We have been hoping, we've been, of course, no guarantees are ever put out there, but we've been assuming that when we have a new, absolutely cutting-edge facility up there, that when we went forward to try to get extensions to the lease, that it would happen. There's no guarantees of that whatsoever, obviously.
I have a kind of an academic question, but it has to do with the concept of decolonial science. Are you familiar with that term as a teaching term in decolonizing or decolonializing science? And what would that look like? I'm not sure where the term, that's not a term I'm familiar with, the colonization of science.
Yeah, it's a term we should all become familiar with.
Okay.
It has to do with positions of privilege and these long histories of how things develop. And you want to always be mindful of groups that you're excluding, right, from your activities just because they haven't traditionally been a part of it. And you have to be even more mindful that things don't get put in place, institutionalized things, that really make it difficult to break out of those molds. This is a pretty interesting and hot topic right now on how to be more inclusive across the board in basically all activities that we do. But in particular, science is one that's kind of been the domain of, white males, people who look like me. And there's no reason for that.
Okay, let me find, there's another good question I wanted to ask about Kalakaua. You guys have been filling with great questions. Okay, he said, quoting King Kalakaua has been a source of controversy. Were you aware that many would take it as a personal insult that your company has it on the first thing you see on the TMT website?
Well, so again, Peter's point, right? Again, no, I wouldn't. So that's my ignorance.
Can you can understand where that might be a case, or is it just a...
Yeah, so I'm very careful not to try to tell anybody what's good for them. I would never presume to speak for Hawaii and what's good for Hawaiians. And in the sense that that's sort of leading up to that, that would probably be where the sensitivity is.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather just lay things out and let people make their own decisions.
Okay, here's one that has to do with the construction and how do you know it's safe, and that the holes you need to drill, that, you know, how do you know that this process is going to be absolutely safe on the mountain? The development of the mountain, the technical side of that safety function.
We're talking about personal human safety?
Yes, I believe that's true, but I would also expand that to a sense of safety on the mountain, or the mountain not having some kind of a reaction to that action. Geological, perhaps. What have you done geologically to predict and anticipate the implications of your construction action?
Okay, so this very quickly gets way out of my area of expertise. I mean, civil engineers, right, have done analysis of the soil, the structure down below where the telescope would be, and that then feeds back into the plans for how you put the structures in there. So that's about all I know. Only because that's not quite what I do.
Okay, here's just a fresh question. You said that UH will get a fraction of the time of use on the telescope. What purposes are the telescopes being used for a majority of the time, and who's doing the work a majority of the time?
Oh, the telescopes, 100% of the time, do astronomy research. That's all they do. And the fraction of time just depends on how much each of the partners puts in to the construction and the operations cost. UH gets some fraction through the sublease. They get some access.
Yeah, how do you give us a little bit more understanding about that body of users? Who kind of makes use of that?
I think that the hasn't completely settled yet, but I think the Japanese will end up being the largest single partner in the project at about 20%. Oh, I see. That's what the question is. You know, so that's... Yeah, okay. So you can choose to believe me or not, but 100% of what we do at all those observatories on Maunakea is astronomy research.
Along with the military, there's a lot of military work that's going on.
We don't do any military work. Absolutely none.
Okay, let's let me see if I can get another question. How about Native Hawaiian employment on the mountain, and how do you know anything about current Native Hawaiian employment on the mountain, or what you think TMT might do to encourage that?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that I had on my list to actually find out what the numbers are. So I don't know. I know it's been getting steadily better for the last 10 years because everybody's been making an attempt to hire, I'm going to say locally, which is a little different than Native Hawaiian, of course, up there. And as I hope to say, what we would like to do for the 30-meter telescope is by the time the telescope is up, and we need engineers and computer scientists and people that will have, in fact, helped put this stuff in place. Many other people are interested in these, in workforce pipeline development, obviously. We're just a piece of that. You know, our goal is to have grown a local workforce for the 30-meter telescope.
It's just got a couple more here, and then we'll move on. Were you involved specifically in the permitting process of the mountain and the cultural impact and the EIS studies and the like? Do you have personal experience in that?
I kind of tracked everything that was going on, so I'm not exactly sure what that means.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to figure out what your basis was. There's a question about the original cultural impact assessment recommendations for no further development on Mauna Kea. That comes out of the draft EIS. But it didn't appear in the final EIS. The cultural impact assessment did not appear in the final impact assessment used in public hearings in '09.
Okay.
Could they actually have gotten an EIS
approved without a cultural impact assessment?
It sure doesn't feel like it to me.
I don't know that. I mean, I'd be interested to know what the source of that was, but in fact, it's not complete without a cultural impact assessment, so it wouldn't have been deemed complete by that time. Yeah, comma. Oh, I was just asking asking you what the clarification. I asked him from it. He had a little source of the data for that this was not included.
A picture of the DEIS, Appendix D, the page that the recommendation was put in. And then I also looked at the FEIS that was provided by the TMT website, where cultural impact assessment was not present. And then it also had been shared with me that it wasn't present in I wasn't old enough to be here at the 2009 meetings, but in the 2009 meetings, said cultural impact assessment with the recommendation for no further development on Maunakea was omitted. Wasn't brought to public hearing, wasn't ever talked about in said public hearing.
Was that Phil Cunnahilly's report?
Yes.
Yes, I'd heard that as well.
So
She
the
wrote
question
the
was for
report, you
clarification
either
on that.
didn't use
I'm
it
not
or
sure if you're
distorted
right.
it.
Okay, well,
Yes.
let's get to that's a good question. Do you have any additional insight to add to that tonight?
Only that they tracked quite carefully the changes from the draft to the final. So when you look at that thing we posted, you can see everything that got changed, scratched, or altered in any way.
Okay, well, maybe we can get some more insight on that and address it at an upcoming meeting. That's a good suggestion.
That's a good idea.
This is, when will construction resume?
I don't know when construction will resume. The governor made his announcement, of course, and that doesn't mean the discussions end by any means. So we have no date for when we're going to do that. Like I said, clearly there's more discussion and conversations that have to happen.
I'm not quite sure if you have the expertise for this question, but is Christianity a culture or a religion? And if Christianity is a religion, why is Hawaiian faith a culture?
Well, since Peter is now the expert in all these, you're in luck. It doesn't quite go that far. I'm not an expert in that.
That's one of those profound questions, and I appreciate you asking it. Yeah. I think it is a profound question, and we use these terms kind of interchangeably in a variety of ways, and each of them has their own power and missing. Oh, Simon is culture.
Okay, so what we do every day is culture.
I see.
Then there's religion or faith. And you make that distinction in your own life of Christianity versus Simon. But you don't make that distinction when you're talking about Hawaiian spirituality. You call it culture.
Yeah, I think it's a fair comment. Thank you. Good. Okay. Well, for the purpose of, some of these are will come up in future conversations. This next group. Some of these questions are really aimed at the next group, and I appreciate the opportunity to ask those again. So, thank you. Right.